I think that's something I would do.
Right. So let's look at question 1. Question 1 asks us this: how does this section reveal the unconscious element of Aschenbach's promptings towards Venice? What is it about the way this is described that suggests that he is being driven towards this location in a way that's beyond his rational control? And how does it connect the location with the text's warning about restraint and rational order? So we're looking at this passage here, where it says, rain and sultry air, a self-enclosed provincial Austrian hotel clientele, the lack of that restful, intimate contact with the sea which can only be had on a gentle, sandy coast, filled him with vexation and with a feeling that he had not yet come to his journey's end. He was haunted by an inner impulse that still had no clear direction. He studied shipping timetables, looked up one place after another, and suddenly his surprising yet at the same time self-evident destination stared him in the face. If one wanted to travel overnight to somewhere incomparable, to a fantastic mutation of normal reality, where did one go? Well, the answer was obvious. What was he doing here? He'd gone completely astray. That was where he had longed to travel. He at once gave notice of departure from his present mischosen stopping place. So this is the moment where he has some realization of actually where he should go. He hasn't yet fully decided upon going to Venice at this point. He's down in Austria, and he is kind of in some way trying to work out where he wants to go, and has realized that this first destination is it's not really doing it for him. It's not cutting the mustard. It's not tickling his fancy, so to speak. So he feels something that motivates him to look elsewhere. If you take a look at this language here, first of all, it describes he was haunted by an inner impulse that still had no clear direction. What is it about that phrasing, you think, that gives us this sense that this decision-making is not being driven by the Apollonian component of the psyche and his own thinking? Absolutely. Haunting, obviously, has connotations of spirituality, and it suggests a lack of control, and that actually he's in some way misguided in following a sort of Apollonian methodology of thinking previously in the text. If we then say it's an inner impulse, it suggests that he's being driven in some way by something beyond rationality, something beyond his own understanding, and therefore is not fully in control of himself, even at this point early on in the text, before things have got kind of out of hand. He then studies shipping timetables, looked up one place after another, Apollonian style thinking, and then suddenly his surprising and yet at the same time self-evident destination stared him in the face. What is it about this combination, you think, that gives us this sense of...
It's an alternation between Apollonian and guidance.
Yeah, this description is... Why is it that material?
Well, because the fact that these destinations are surprising, and it's like it's a bit of a foreshadowing of what will happen afterwards, as he will completely lose control, and it will try to alternate between Apollonian and rationality, and instead the id will completely take over.
Absolutely. There is a component to his psyche that suddenly is revealed to him at this moment. If it's surprising and at the same time self-evident,
Unexpected idea.
what is it about this that tells us the way that he's thinking, the way that he's being driven here? If something is surprising and yet self-evident, there's a kind of tension in that meaning. So if it's surprising, it implies what about the realization?
That you don't know unexpected.
Yeah, it's unexpected, you don't know about it, or that it's new in some way. And yet if it's self-evident, what does that suggest?
It's understandable.
Yeah, it's clear and it's plain, and there's something obvious about it. So if something is at the same time surprising and yet self-evident, it suggests to us that everything that this place stands for is alien to him. Everything that Venice stands for in his mind is foreign to him or strange. It embodies passion and art and exoticism. in his mind, but that all of those things are missing from his life and his psyche.
Yeah, there is no relation or connection to his surroundings.
No. And that's why it's surprising to him. Even though it's glaringly obvious, that's why it's surprising to him, because it's missing from his life. So even though Venice embodies all these things, they're all missing from his existence and his life. If one wanted to travel overnight to somewhere incomparable, to a fantastic mutation of normal reality, where did one go? So if we think about this phrase here, this is a very clear example of foreshadowing. Man makes enormous use of foreshadowing. There's thousands of examples of it throughout the text. A fantastic mutation of normal reality. Let's think about the connotations of these two words here. Fantastic and mutation. When you hear mutation, do you think it's a positive or a negative word?
Actually,
I mean,
Think of what types of mutation do you think of? If someone hears, if you hear the word mutation, what's the first thing that comes into your head?
cancer.
Cancer. Biology, weird adaptations, strange. If we said mutations, we mean like strange forms of things that are ghastly usually.
Call me a nerd, but the thing that came to mind when you said mutation was like something supernatural, like something like a monster.
Exactly. So something fantastic obviously has the very immediate sense of it being positive, but it also means the realm of fantasy, something that is based on the imagination. So there's this sense of this being positive and this being negative that creates this uneasy tension in this phrase, that Venice is in some way the realm of the imagination, but it's going to warp everything that he has held dear to himself up to this point. So it is going to be the site of imagination and passion. But
his negative connotation of imagination and passion makes it a connotation.
yeah, that there's some. The mutation is going to come from the loss of his rational, rigid, ordered existence that he values and has staked his whole artistic identity on. So is a kind of gamble to him, actually. The things that he's missing, if he overly embraces the things that are missing from his life, everything that he's invested in as an artistic individual is at risk because of being overwhelmed by that kind of impulsive streak in his personality that he has kind of repressed for a long time. Let's jump forward to the next question, which is focused on this passage here, which is the majority of this kind of middle paragraph on the next page. There's lots and lots of mythological allusions in Death in Venice, and this is one of the most sort of heavily developed ones. An allusion to Charon, the ferryman who ushers souls of the living across the river Styx in hell into their kind of final, we'll call it resting place. Yeah. This allusion is constantly referred to as Aschenbach travels by boat over to Venice. So the immediate kind of suggestion of this, exactly, it is. The suggestion here is of obviously him being driven towards his own demise.
Exactly, and it's not him that is deciding, but someone else.
Exactly. Think of that as we read this passage, because the question's asking us here, how does this section connect to the Freudian notion of the death drive, Thanatos? Let's have a look at this. It says, Aschenbach was no sooner aboard than a grubby, hunchbacked seaman, grinning obsequiously, means as if he's, desperately trying to please him, conducted him to an artificially lit cave-like cabin in the ship's interior. Here, behind a table, with his cap askew and a cigarette end in the corner of his mouth, sat a goat-bearded man, with the air of an old-fashioned circus director and a slick, caricatured business manner, taking passengers' particulars and issuing their tickets. "To Venice," he exclaimed, echoing Aschenbach's request, and extending his arm as he pushed his pen into some coagulated leftover ink in a tilted inkstand. "One first class to Venice? Certainly, sir." He scribbled elaborately, shook some blue sand from a box over the writing and ran it off into an earthenware dish, then folded the paper with his yellow bony fingers and wrote on it again. "A very happily chosen destination." He chattered as he did so. "Ah, Venice, a splendid city. A city irresistibly attractive to the man of culture by its history no less than by its present charms. There was something hypnotic and distracting about the smooth facility of his movements and the glib, empty talk with which he accompanied them, almost as if he were anxious that the traveller might have second thoughts about his decision to go to Venice. He hastily took Aschenbach's money and, with the dexterity of a croupier, dropped the change on the stained tablecloth. "Buon divertimento, signore," he said, bowing histrionically. "It is an honour to serve you. Next, please, gentlemen," he exclaimed with a wave of the arm, as if he were doing a lively trade, although in fact there was no one else there to be dealt with. Aschenbach returned on the deck. Now, when you read this first time through, it doesn't sound that sinister. It just sounds like a kind of slightly annoying person trying to make money out of a tourist. You know, and if you've never been to Venice, I'm sure you've seen plenty of that. I mean, there's lots of it in Rome too. The description of him is important at the beginning, though. His cap askew. Why is it important that he's wearing a hat?
Like the other
It's wrong.
Exactly, just like the other Dionysian appearance. Here's another one. He's a cigarette end in the corner of his mouth, and he's goat-bearded.
Doesn't this also
Foreshadow.
foreshadow the, as you said, the origin of the
Absolutely. If you think of one of the things that's constantly associated with Dionysus, are satyrs.
come si chiamano?
The half-man, half-goat things. Satyrs, they're called.
Sati.
S-A-T-Y-R.
Come si scrive?
S-A-T-Y-R.
Like this.
S-A-T.
S-A-T?
S-A-T-Y-R. He is described, I think, in a way that's meant to make him sound like a satyr. And there is a connotation that is in some way satanic as well. Because if you think of the description of Satan, he often is described as if he has a cloven hoof like a kind of goat. So there's something satanic and then reminding us of a satyr. Now, satyrs are part of Dionysian revelries. You know, they are in mythology the animals that, when they're talking about libido and desire and sexuality, in mythology, satyrs are used to embody that. And so we've got a very deliberate echoing of that, both combination of Eros and Thanatos. The death drive. This man is coaxing Aschenbach towards his doom, coaxing him towards his death, but at the same time is allied with libido and sexuality and Eros and desire because of this reference that suggests that he is goat-bearded. If you take a look at the following descriptions, he has the air of an old-fashioned circus director and a slick, caricatured businessman. Why does this matter that he seems like a circus director in terms of thinking about Aschenbach's control?
Circus is like, it's not, it does, the aim is to create like happiness and like to create something joyful, not something restricted. Like you usually see people which are out of normality.
Absolutely. The fantastic mutation of normal reality is going to be conducted by this man. So he is in control of this. He is the ringleader of this madness that is about to unfold in Aschenbach's life. He's tempting him to madness. And his dialogue is deliberately presented to make him seem like this kind of untrustworthy, kind of slippery individual. Further down, he says, "Ah, Venice, a splendid city. A city irresistibly attractive to the man of culture, by its history no less than by its present charms." What is it about this that's seductive to Aschenbach?
Yes,
Attracted to the man of culture, and that's his Apollonian style of
Absolutely.
And then, the other part of the sentence, by its history no less than by its present charms, and that's his impulsive dynamism.
Yeah, those present charms make it sound quite tempting. There's something of a tempter about him here. He's giving him this suggestion that don't worry about it, you're still the intellectual that you've always wanted to be, but there's something seedy waiting for you here. This is the subtext, I think, of this particular dialogue. He then says that there's something hypnotic and distracting about the smooth facility of the movements and the glib, empty talk with which he accompanied them. What do you make of this characterization of the man? His movements are smooth and easy. He can just quickly maneuver the change and the money. And he seems hypnotic and distracting.
untrustworthy.
Yeah, he does seem untrustworthy. I think if you think of him there as in some way kind of
Typical Italian.
Yeah.
Oh.
he does seem in some way untrustworthy and kind of dangerous to him in some way. He's got some sense of slickness about him that is a little bit sinister in its connotations. He almost says it almost as if he were anxious that the traveller might have second thoughts about his decision to go to Venice. That's the most sinister part of the passage for me.
There must have been like a reason to like maybe something happened.
So why is it sinister though in terms of him being anxious to quickly make sure he gets his ticket, get him on the boat? If you see this man echoing this myth of Charon ushering the souls of the dead. There's a lot. There's a lot in that question.
Yes.
If you think of the fact that this is an allusion to that mythological story of the ferryman ushering the
There's
souls of the
only
dead
one
towards
way-
hell.
no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly that. Once you cross that river, you ain't coming back. So this speed that he's trying to hurry Aschenbach along, and all of this empty talk and seductive language is to try and get Aschenbach to buy a ticket, get on the boat, and go. Well, if it is an allusion to Charon, the sort of ferryman in hell, then there's a suggestion that he is coaxing him along towards his own death, that he wants to coax him along towards his own death, and that his performative slickness is part of the seduction of Aschenbach towards his own doom. His smooth talking and his flattery are actually sinister threats to Aschenbach.
Also, like this idea, it's also like yellow bony finger, his yellow, like his physical appearance.
Yeah, his physical appearance seems
Like,
disturbed or rotten or mouldy or kind of gross in some physical fashion. The last part as well is creepy. He says, buon divertimento, signore, and then he bows histrionically. If you do something histrionically, you do it with this sense of great performativity.
Fake.
Yeah, exactly. Seems inauthentic.
It's
There's
like
a
a
huge
circus.
sense of, absolutely, he's bowing like as if he's performed a circus trick. He's tempted someone into something artificial.
And Aschenbach falls in that trap.
Exactly. So for this man who is a kind of titanic intellect and highly rational and cautious, he's been seduced by someone in a circus
So this
costume.
also symbolizes like him entering the domain of like Dionysian.
Absolutely. He's
Both
basically
as if he like enters as he is entering Venice, not the capital of the arts, especially in like Italy or like in Europe.
mm,
And
he's not cut out for this. You can see his naivety in this. He's not sort of streetwise to this type of behavior.
not in his habit.
No, he is out of his comfort zone and he is easily seduced. And if you look at that last description, as if he were doing a lively trade, although there is in fact no one else there to be dealt with. So his lines are very directly and explicitly exposed as performance. He says, "Next, please, gentlemen," and there's no one there. There is no next gentleman. It's just Aschenbach being driven across on the ferry. He's the only one waiting for the ticket. There are other people on the boat, as we see in a second.
He goes to Venice by boat.
Yeah, that there is exposing the inauthenticity of his performance here. He's exposing the fact that he's both sinister and inauthentic at the same time. So there's this mythological kind of texture to this story that is partly what the story is about. It's about the sort of explosion of myth into the life of a man who has been occupied with it all of his life. He finds that his own life starts to mirror that mythological structure of the stories that he's written, and he doesn't know how to control it. There's that mythological element exploding into the sort of daily things with which he finds himself occupied. And so those mythological allusions are very deliberate and quite loud. They're not subtle, very gentle mythological allusions. They're almost explicit. An allusion can't be explicit, but they kind of slap you over the face. They're so strong. The next passage I want to jump forward to is on 2:14 to 5, and I want you to look at it immediately after this one, because this is actually when it gets to Venice. So we're going to come back a little ways after this one, but look at this in tandem with the previous one.
Like of the boat, the rounds of hell, and there is the one about the Surian, which is the one like lust, like the lust, like it foreshadows the he's moving.
Absolutely. You'll see lots and lots of intertextual allusions in Thomas Mann. He's deeply immersed in literary history, Dante particularly, and Greek myth. The second part of this question says, how does this description of the gondolier build upon this sort of hellish motif established in this previous passage? So take a look at this.
Is that the boat that Sharon used to like bring the souls into like hell?
Absolutely. This is where it gets even louder, and the sinister qualities of this are even more emphasized.
How do you say his name in English? Sharon.
Charon.
Sharon.
So
Sherlock.
let's take a look at this passage. It says, can there be anyone who has not had to overcome a fleeting sense of dread, a secret shudder of uneasiness, on stepping for the first time or after a long interval of years into a Venetian gondola? How strange a vehicle it is, coming down unchanged from times of old romance, and so characteristically black, the way no other thing is black except a coffin, a vehicle evoking lawless adventures in the plashing stillness of night, and still more strongly evoking death itself, the bier and the dark obsequies, the last silent journey. And it has been observed that the seat of such a boat, that armchair with its coffin black lacquer and dull black upholstery, is the softest, the most voluptuous and enervating seat in the world. So let's just take a look at this quickly and think about...
They call it blackness.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere, isn't it? There's the colour black is constantly used, or the darkness in this description, to describe the gondolier and the gondola itself. And so you've got this very direct sense of foreshadowing of Aschenbach's later demise, and the suggestion that he is being ushered towards his own death.
Also, how the color black is often associated to death, or like something bleak, grim.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you have this kind of weird contrast here. When they're describing the chair in the gondola, it's the softest, the most voluptuous, and most enervating seat in the whole world. These are very different terms to describe something that's deathly.
Soft and voluptuous.
I mean, where would you what kind of domain of life would you tend to associate soft voluptuousness?
Birth.
Tell me how.
Soft. Usually don't you say like also like as soft as mother's child?
Well, hang on. Softness maybe, but voluptuous. Voluptuous. Are we clear about what this means, voluptuous?
Yes.
The most commonly used context for this word is people describing female bodies.
Sex.
Yeah. Thank you, yeah. Perfect. So, when people describe the hourglass figure of a woman, you know, that is voluptuous, curvaceous is usually what it means.
Not soft.
But it basically means sensory pleasure. If something is,
Are you recording?
yeah, if something is voluptuous, it means it's sort of sensorily pleasurable. That's the main thing you have to take from this. So the key thing that you have to bear in mind here is this combination. Calm yourselves. Oh, so much excitement about the word voluptuous. Sexy. Thanks for that, yeah. The main... So hang on. The key thing to take from this is the combination. The combination here is both kind of seductive and dangerous. So if you think of this combination of what this is warning us about the nature of Aschenbach's demise, is that there is going to be a kind of a sensory, impulsive, libidinous component to this that's to do with sexual desire, but that is entangled with deathliness. And in effect, you've got the prediction of the story there. The sensory, impulsive behavior is what's going to drag him towards his death. That's what's going to doom him. And so you have these echoes of this all the way through. And you see it in that first instance, the sensory pleasure of the circus carnival and the seductive nature of what the man is promising him. combined with his sinister connotations. We'll hear the deathly connotations of the gondola, and then it's supposedly kind of sensory kind of pleasure that's involved in just sitting in the sea. Has this combination of pleasure and pain and libido and deathly impulse, thanatos and eros, that you see all the way throughout the text.
Doesn't this also meant to like symbolize the two like main roads or like paths that like are themes? I could say like in the novel, like his death are surely one of the most important things, and that's why they're like dark, obscure, black, and not the gondola. It would be like sort of envisioned like this deathly so aspect of the world. Whereas also there's the second aspect to his life that is the sex.
Absolutely.
Sexual.
But the key thing here is that they're interrelated. That the one brings about
one
the other.
brings the other.
The impulsive libidinous desire, in the end, for a child, is what brings about his moral and physical degeneration.
So it's like also like talk about mythology, whatever it is. It's like a siren or something.
Absolutely. There is some sort of temptation here that I think the previous kind of role is designed to fulfill. Let's just squeeze in the third one before the bell goes. So the third question concerns this passage here.
211.
On 211. This is a description. He finds, when he gets on the boat, he finds that there's a group of, basically of guys who are on their way to Venice, I think, for some kind of party or celebration. And he notices at once, among this party of young men, there is an older one who he doesn't immediately notice as being old. And this realization is this example of seeing into the future of himself. So he says, one of the party, who wore a light yellow summer suit of extravagant cut, a scarlet necktie and a rakishly tilted Panama hat, was the most conspicuous of them all in his shrill hilarity. He's very loud and kind of clowning around. But as soon as Aschenbach took a slightly closer look at him, he realized with a kind of horror that the man's youth was false. He was old. There was no mistaking it. There were wrinkles round his eyes and mouth. His cheeks' faint carmine was rouge. It was kind of makeup. The brown hair under his straw hat, again, with its coloured ribbon, was a wig. His neck was flaccid and scrawny. His small stuck-on moustache and the little imperial on his chin, it's a little kind of beauty spot, were dyed. His yellowish full complement of teeth, displayed when he laughed, were a cheap artificial set, and his hands, with signet rings on both index fingers, were those of an old man. With a spasm of distaste, Aschenbach watched him as he kept company with his young friends. Did they not notice that he was old, that he had no right to be acting as if he were among them? Now, this is a really complex passage in terms of the text itself. It is very heavily foreshadowing Aschenbach's own demise. One of the most disturbing passages in this book is Aschenbach he does this to himself to sort of appeal to this Tadzio, who's 11 or 12 years old. He puts makeup on. And in the state where he dies, he's made up like this man. And it's one of the most disturbing bits of all literature I've ever read, I think. Even though actually there's nothing physically horrifying going on. Just the sad tragedy of this man desperately trying to convince himself that he's younger to basically fulfill a kind of paedophilic sexual desire. It's one of the most unpleasant things I've ever read, I think.
Where are we reading this?
Because it produces good essays, believe it or not. One of the important things that goes on in this, and multiple times throughout the book, is the uncanny. Now, the Freudian uncanny means when you... In German, the translation is unheimlich, and it means unhomely. And what it generally means is something that seems both familiar and part of yourself and strange simultaneously. So if you think of déjà vu is uncanny because it feels familiar, and yet you can't work out where it's come from. It's strange at the same time. Uncanniness is that combination of it being familiar and weird simultaneously because it makes you feel like part of yourself you're alienated from. He sees this here, and he can't work out why, but it's because it's a projection of his own future. He's looking into the future by looking at this man, seeing this uncanny vision of what he will look like as he gets older. And all of this physical description that emphasizes his age is foreshadowing his own degeneration. Importantly, the very final part of this that I've annotated in black here, there is a spasm of distaste. So Aschenbach is horrified by the thing that he himself becomes. So this moralistic perspective that he has at the beginning of the text is completely disrupted here, because he hates the thing that in the end he's going to become. It's
Is he
horrible.
having like